Breaking news, a message from Moscow has just sent shockwaves through London. Vladimir Putin has issued what officials are calling his most direct threat to Britain in over a decade. It wasn't a missile test, it wasn't a speech, it was a warning. A warning calculated, cold, and unmistakably personal. The Russian president, speaking during a late-night address in Moscow, declared that London must remember who holds the balance of power. Within minutes, intelligence sources confirmed what many feared. Russian naval movements in the North Atlantic had changed course, heading closer to UK waters. Inside Downing Street, panic began to spread like fire through paper. Keir Starmer's government, already under immense pressure over defence spending, suddenly found itself staring into a crisis that no one had prepared for. The Prime Minister's response was delayed, confused and brief. But one voice was not silent, Nigel Farage. Within the hour, he took to national television, accusing the government of sleepwalking into a foreign humiliation. His words cut deep. "This is what happens," he said, "when a country trades its sovereignty for softness." The nation was listening. Across Britain, the headlines exploded. Putin threatens London. UK forces on alert. Farage demands action. Social media turned into a battlefield of its own, between those who feared escalation and those who felt betrayal. Behind the closed doors of Whitehall, defence officials reportedly confronted the Prime Minister about delayed naval readiness, outdated equipment and years of ignored intelligence reports. One senior advisor leaked that a major fleet was already out of position, a devastating revelation that made it clear Britain's shield was cracking. By dawn, reports confirmed that Russian surveillance vessels had been detected near the Norwegian Sea, just miles from NATO's joint command routes. Military analysts described the manoeuvres as a strategic intimidation move, but the tone from Moscow was darker. Putin, according to Kremlin insiders, was furious over recent UK intelligence operations in Eastern Europe, operations that allegedly interfered with Russian sovereignty. In simple terms, Britain had crossed a line. Farage, in his second statement of the day, demanded a full emergency session of Parliament, declaring that the Prime Minister must stop hiding behind Brussels and stand up for Britain. His words electrified Parliament and enraged Downing Street. The government accused him of exploiting the crisis for personal gain. But it was too late. Farage had already positioned himself as the voice of defiance, and Starmer the face of weakness. Meanwhile, King Charles was briefed at Windsor. Sources close to the palace revealed he was deeply concerned about the deteriorating situation and requested direct updates from the Ministry of Defence. The symbolism was impossible to ignore. When the monarch had to step in to seek truth, the nation knew leadership had faltered. As tensions rose, intelligence officers issued a chilling notice. Intercepted Russian communications indicated that London had been mapped. Whether it was psychological warfare or something more, no one could be sure. But the message was clear. Russia was testing Britain's resolve, not just its military might. Within hours, the pound dropped sharply. European markets trembled. The question hanging over Westminster was one that hadn't been asked since the Cold War. Would Britain fight back? Every major media outlet demanded a response. Starmer appeared on camera briefly, insisting the government was closely monitoring the situation. But the lack of clarity only deepened the panic. On social platforms, clips of Farage calling for a patriotic revival of British defence went viral. Even opposition MPs began to echo his words. The narrative was shifting from fear to fury. Then came the leak. A confidential Defence Ministry document appeared online, allegedly revealing that nearly half of the Royal Navy's surveillance systems had not been updated in years and that several critical missile systems were still awaiting replacement parts. It was an embarrassment that shattered confidence overnight. Putin didn't need to attack, when Britain was already exposing its weakness from within. As evening fell, ordinary citizens began to gather outside Parliament with Union flags and signs reading, "Defend Britain now." They chanted for action, for not politics, for truth, not excuses. The sense of betrayal was palpable. The Prime Minister's silence had become deafening, while Farage's every word seemed to echo louder. And then, without warning, new satellite data confirmed Russian aircraft circling dangerously close to UK airspace. The alert level was raised. Fighter jets scrambled from RAF Lossiemouth. The crisis had entered its second stage. Britain was on edge. The question no one could yet answer was simple and terrifying. The night that followed felt endless. Across Whitehall, lights burned in every window as the Prime Minister summoned his senior defence counsel. What was meant to be a crisis meeting quickly became a confession chamber. Generals spoke with clipped tones. Advisors whispered about readiness levels they no longer trusted. And one word kept echoing in the room: exposure. Britain had been exposed, not just militarily, but morally. Years of political promises about global leadership had been stripped bare in a single night by a Russian provocation. Inside that tense meeting, a senior intelligence officer broke rank and admitted the truth. Our deterrent means nothing if no one believes we'd use it. That single line, according to leaks, silenced the room. The Prime Minister reportedly lowered his head and said nothing. Outside, Downing Street's gates were surrounded by journalists demanding answers. And across the Thames, a different energy was rising. Nigel Farage was about to make his move. Farage had waited for this moment for years. Standing before cameras outside Parliament, he declared, "If the government won't act, then the people will demand a government that will." His tone was not campaign rhetoric, but it was a warning. He accused Starmer of betraying the nation, of letting Britain's armed forces rot under bureaucracy and globalist obedience. Within hours, his words were trending across every platform. Thousands began calling for a vote of no confidence. In Westminster's dark corridors, panic turned into chaos. Labour backbenchers whispered about leadership alternatives. The Defence Secretary was cornered by reporters and refused to answer basic questions. Even party loyalists admitted privately that the Prime Minister's credibility was collapsing. Meanwhile, Russian media channels broadcasted propaganda clips mocking Britain's defensive confusion. It wasn't just a political crisis, and it was psychological warfare. By morning, the situation had grown worse. Reports surfaced that British intelligence networks in Eastern Europe had gone dark. No explanation, no confirmation, just silence. It was the kind of silence that made every official in London uneasy. NATO issued a statement expressing concern, but stopped short of offering direct support. Britain, it seemed, was being isolated, and everyone could feel it. At the same time, Farage convened what his aides called an emergency patriot summit. Retired generals, economists, and former intelligence officers gathered in secret at a private club in Westminster. Their mission was clear: to draft a plan to restore Britain's defence credibility, even if it meant confronting the government publicly. According to one participant, the mood was electric. "We knew history was turning," he later said. "It felt like 1940 again, except this time the enemy wasn't across the channel. It was inside our own walls." Meanwhile, inside Buckingham Palace, King Charles was briefed again. A royal aide described him as visibly alarmed by the paralysis in government. Though constitutionally neutral, the king was said to have urged clarity and unity, a rare intervention. That phrase, leaked to the press, was interpreted as a royal rebuke of the Prime Minister's handling of the crisis. For the first time, the palace had cast a moral shadow over Downing Street. Then came the breaking point. During a heated session in Parliament, Farage stormed the floor with a fiery address that would define the week. "This government," he shouted, "has turned Britain's lion into a paper tiger. Putin knows it, our allies know it, and the British people deserve better." The chamber erupted. Some cheered, others jeered, but no one could ignore him. Cameras captured Starmer's expression: pale, strained, cornered. It was the image that would play on every news channel that night. Outside Westminster, protests grew. Crowds waved flags and chanted, "Save our sovereignty! Restore our defence!" Even former Labour voters joined in, disillusioned by what they called the great silence of leadership. Across the nation, a sense of collective anxiety began to take hold. Could this be the start of something bigger? A breakdown not just of government, but of the very faith that held Britain together. And then, as if the tension needed one more spark, an anonymous intelligence source released a short, encrypted message to the press. It contained only 5 words: "London has already been warned." No one knew where it came from, no one knew who sent it, but the implication was clear that the threat wasn't over, it was only beginning. That night, RAF Command received classified images showing unknown vessels shifting course again in the North Atlantic, this time closer than before. Britain's Naval Command went to full alert, fighter jets scrambled once more, and yet the political leadership remained paralysed. The public was asking the one question that could no longer be avoided. If the government won't defend Britain, who will? By dawn, London felt different. The air was thick with unease. That heavy silence before history makes its next move. Across the capital, news presenters spoke in grave tones, while footage of jets streaking over the North Sea looped endlessly. The British people were no longer watching politics, but they were watching a government unravel. And then a single headline appeared that set the country ablaze. A secret MOD briefing leaked. Prime Minister ignored early warning. Within minutes, social media exploded. Screens everywhere flashed with the same words. He knew. The report, allegedly from a classified Ministry of Defence meeting weeks earlier, claimed that the Prime Minister had been directly briefed about Russian naval movements and dismissed them as posturing. The revelation shattered what little confidence remained. Downing Street was silent, the Defence Secretary refused to appear on air. And somewhere deep inside Whitehall, aides were seen carrying boxes of documents out of the building. The crisis had entered free fall. Nigel Farage seized the moment. Standing before a roaring crowd outside Parliament, he thundered, "They've lied to us. They've endangered us, and now they hide behind silence while our enemies laugh." His voice, sharp and commanding, cut through the cold air like a blade. People chanted his name as if he were already leading the charge. Banners waved. "Resign now. Defend Britain. No more lies." The protest was meant to last hours, but it turned into an overnight vigil. Tens of thousands gathered, refusing to leave until answers came. Inside the palace, the king faced an impossible decision. Advisors urged restraint, reminding him that the monarch could not intervene in political affairs. Yet the reports from his security briefings painted a grim picture. British defences stretched, allies hesitant, leadership fractured. One senior royal aide later described that night as the moment the crown felt the weight of the people's fear. The king reportedly ordered emergency communication with NATO command, a symbolic move, but a clear sign that even the monarchy no longer trusted the government's grip. Meanwhile, a new player entered the stage. Mark Carney, the Canadian Prime Minister, called for an emergency summit, accusing Britain of strategic negligence. His statement was diplomatic in tone, but carried an unmistakable edge. If Britain cannot maintain its own stability, it endangers all of us. The message landed like a hammer blow. Within hours, foreign markets reacted, the pound plunged, and international analysts began whispering about the London paralysis. Then came the most devastating twist of all. Late that night, a whistleblower from the Ministry of Defence leaked fragments of a secret memorandum, Project Sentinel. It revealed that Britain had quietly reduced its rapid response fleet over the past year, transferring assets to EU coordination commands without public consent. The document bore signatures, high-level ones. It was the kind of betrayal that would have once brought down a government overnight. As the truth spread, Parliament descended into open rebellion. Backbench MPs crossed the aisle. Ministers resigned live on television. The Speaker's gavel pounded against chaos. And in the middle of it all, Keir Starmer sat motionless, surrounded by a wall of noise, shouting outrage, resignation. He knew it was over. His words, when they finally came, were barely audible. "This house has lost its faith in me. I accept that cameras captured the image of a broken man, once hailed as Britain's stabiliser, now seen as the architect of its humiliation." Outside, Nigel Farage stepped before the cameras once more. The crowd was enormous now, stretching from Westminster Bridge to Trafalgar Square. His tone had changed. It was no longer anger. It was resolve. "Britain must never be ruled by fear," he said. "Our enemies think we're weak. They think we've lost who we are. But tonight, we stand as one. Not left, not right, but British." The cheers were deafening. It wasn't just a speech, it was a declaration. And then, the final blow. Moscow released a chilling statement warning that any interference in Russian interests will be met with decisive response. Yet this time, the British public did not flinch. The narrative had shifted. It was no longer about Russia, it was about Britain itself, its pride, its courage, its identity. The question was no longer whether London would respond, but who would lead that response. Inside Buckingham Palace, the King prepared an address, rare, solemn and urgent. Every network cleared its schedule. Across Britain, families gathered around their screens, waiting. When the broadcast began, the King's voice was steady, deliberate. There are moments, he said, when a nation must remember who it is. Tonight we stand not divided, but determined. Our duty is not to fear, but to endure. The speech lasted less than 5 minutes, but its echo could be felt across the nation. By dawn, Westminster looked different. The old order had cracked. A new movement was forming, unpredictable, defiant, unstoppable. The headlines the next morning captured it perfectly.